lot of our audience will know him from comics and movies and TV and everything. But you may not know that he actually voices one of the characters on one of the TV shows, or did.
Yeah.
Anyways, I'll let Mike introduce you.
But Joe's been a pillar of the comic book community for many years. He's worked for every major company. He's done a lot of work for Image as well. He broke into comics in how old? In 1995.
No, yeah, that's right.
He had a fanzine out. But then he moved on to Marvel, where he's written Wolverine, X-Men, the Hellfire Club, Microcosm, more X-Men, Juggernaut. He's also done a lot of work for Image. In fact, Joe, you probably have more work on Image than any other publisher, including Hellcop, Code Flash, Youngblood, Velocity with Kevin McGuire, Crash Bastards, Nixon's Pals, Charlatan Ball, Officer Down, Butch Baker, and Joe's been involved in animation as well. He's one of the co-creators of Ben 10 and a number of other shows. Is the character that you voiced, is that on Ben 10?
No,
it was on a show other show we created for Cartoon Network called Generator Rex.
Is that still operating?
That ran a couple seasons, but fondly remembered. But no, it's been gone a while.
You're in a rock band.
Well, I've been playing in bands since I was 15 years old. So that's.
What's the name of the current band?
Megawatt.
Megawatt. Joe shared a couple of tracks with me, and they were very exciting. They're exactly the type of power pop that I love to hear and love to review. And he's looking for a record deal. And keep your fingers crossed, because the band deserves to be heard. And you have a whole album ready to go.
Yeah.
What do you play?
Guitar.
Cool.
And you write the songs?
Yes. It's another excuse to be a writer,
Yeah.
I have a theory that the instrument on which you compose has a profound effect on the type of music you produce. That listening to your tunes, I don't think that the guitar is a limiting factor to you. It seems to me that when I hear more progressive rock and more chords that I haven't heard before, that most of those composers compose on keyboards.
Right.
And I think that the keyboard lends itself to more musical experimentation simply because of its physical attributes. You can use two hands, you can play two chords, different chords at the same time, and do contra melodies if you like. It's just a theory.
So into production and things like that. So the guitar is the start of something, but to go in the studio and craft it and kind of make a whole sound out of it I'm sort of into that too.
Have you been listening to new music?
Not a whole lot these days.
Every year I say it, and every year it's true. This has been one of the greatest years for pop music in history, but you'd never know it reading Rolling Stone or watching the award shows or looking at the Billboard charts, because pop music, the kind we used to enjoy, like the British Invasion, power pop, has all been forced underground by the industry.
There's no rock stars anymore, really. There's no culture around it. I mean, we're all old enough to remember when the rock music, sound really old, was central to the culture.
Yeah.
And
it's
music
true.
was instrument of social change, or at least social influence.
Yeah.
And it's just not anymore. So if it's not that, you're not going to get everything that goes along with it, the personalities, the mystique, the mythology, and it's just kind of background noise now.
Well, you do have internet phenomenon who work on their personality and attract a huge following. But that's a different thing. And the changing technology has had a profound effect on the music to which we listen. There are hardly any record stores left.
Yeah.
Yeah, and everybody's downloading stuff, and there's a whole generation that's been raised without any physical product. They don't have albums to look through. They just download the tunes to their personal device.
Right.
Which has helped destroy the album, because now you have a hit song, get by on that. You can make a lot of money on one song. Whereas in the past, 30 or 40 years ago, the market demanded an album.
Yeah.
Well, vinyls came back for a little while there, but it seems like they're kind of going out again.
Well, the thing came back as a novelty,
right?
Item, I think, as opposed to
the
concept of an album from start to finish,
right?
A musical statement, that's what's missing, I think.
But a lot of guys are doing that. But as I said, it's underground. Like the Neil Morse band is a prog rock band. And they've done a 2-disc set based on Pilgrim's Progress, and it's phenomenal. If you like Yes, with bands like that, you'd love the Neil Morse band.
So you started music around 16. When did you start like writing or doing comics or anything like that?
You mean as like something I wanted to do?
Just start, and just the beginnings. Obviously, not necessarily professional.
I can't remember not being into comics, I was that young, and then wanting to do them and trying to do them. Probably not long after I started reading them, I would start, doing my horrible 7-year-old comics and trying to make it happen. One of those things where you connect with an art form, you connect with a language, and you just want to immerse yourself in it as much as possible. And so, memory's a weird thing. I'm probably conflating a lot of years and stuff, but I do remember being very young and trying to make my own comics,
You probably were. I know a lot of us were like around like 2nd grade, 3rd grade and stuff when we were starting to do things. So I wouldn't be surprised.
I feel like as soon as you get the concept of like the comics that you're reading were made with, pencil to paper,
right?
And, pen to paper, and then you look around and you go, I've got a pen, I've got paper, let's do it. Let's see what we can do here.
And comics are the most forgiving medium there is.
I've based my career on that philosophy, Mike.
You can get away with things in comics you couldn't in any other medium.
That's for sure.
See, and I'm going to be paying real close attention to you because I've read your thing about saying how you would sleep when you have sunglasses on, so no one would know. I have a feeling that Mike did that too for a while at conventions and things, because he used to wear sunglasses quite a bit.
That's true. I wear them even more today.
This is my tribute to Mike and Nexus, these glasses this morning.
Yeah.
It's also early enough that I don't know what's going on under here.
Right. So how long were you doing the fanzine before you actually got into, like, what was that transition?
Well, I mean, fanzine's actually a generous word. I mean, when I was in high school, when I was in high school, the black and white boom happened.
Yeah.
And there was a small press thing going on, really small press. Mike, you might have heard this magazine. There was a magazine called Small Press Comics Explosion.
Yeah.
That was like,
I did.
It was like a Maximum Rock and Roll for the small press.
Right.
Very, very kind of just above an APA, basically. And you connect to people through there. And I did a couple of no money gigs through that network because I just wanted to do it. I just wanted to get in print.
Right.
I just wanted to be a part of it. And I mean, at the same time, I was sending in submissions to Marvel and DC, totally misguided on thinking I thought I was going to be, Jim Shooter breaking in at 14, whatever.
Right.
That was not the case, but I was doing sort of underground stuff on the side. And then in the mid 90s, when I moved to Los Angeles, just for things to do, I was doing things for there was a guy named Jim Kingman who had a little fanzine kind of small press review magazine, I guess you could call it. and I wrote things for that. I mean, I was doing anything I could to kind of build what I was hoped would be a career. Just get your name in print, because I have this theory that, and I guess it bears out, that the more you do things that other people will see, the better you'll get. Because when you see that stuff, you see the mistakes you made, you see where you're weak in certain areas, and so I wanted to get that shit over with as quickly as possible. A little quick gig doing like movie trailers and just anything that I could. I was starting to write screenplays. I just wanted to write for a living, basically, because I saw the other side of it. I didn't want to spend my whole life in retail hell behind a counter, making change for people, which was really the only other skill set that I had. So it was either this was a ride or die kind of attitude that I had.
There are a lot of writers who followed the same path I did. I've been fired from every job I ever held.
A lot of people are so precious, so they're embarrassed about sharing, but it's like you got to start putting stuff out there, especially if you want to make connections, because it's those connections that will lead to the job opportunities and things. And
well, that's what happened to me. I mean, when I moved out to Los Angeles, I met a lot of professional comic writers. I mean, they were going to the store that I was going to, and that kind of crew of LA-based writers kind of helped me get in. Some of them got me in, but I don't think they would have if they didn't see that I was already trying to hustle and trying to do whatever I could. I mean, they saw that I was serious about doing it. I think if I'd just been hanging around just as a, like a barfly, then they wouldn't have taken me seriously, and they wouldn't have given me the hand that that I needed. I mean, I wouldn't have gotten into Marvel without James Robinson. James Robinson, who I'd met a few years previous to that, just literally held the door open for me.
Wow.
And it's like a debt. I've said it many times. It's a debt that I could never repay. But that kicked off my professional career. I've done a couple things here and there before that I got paid for in comics, but that first regular monthly gig was it was everything. Well, it's funny because it feels really difficult to break into comics until you break in, and then you look back and go, "Oh, that was easy." That kind of a lot of luck, a lot of good timing, but other than that, it just kind of happened, and then suddenly I was doing it. I mean, I was thrilled, but looking back, it was like, well, that was a lot easier than it felt at the time. At the time, it seemed very precarious and like, am I going to get in? Am I going to do this? And even when I got in, it took me maybe a year or two, maybe even longer, to really feel like, oh, maybe I could stick around for this. Maybe this could be an actual career.
Did you deal with the kind of imposter syndrome or anything that a lot of people?
It wasn't imposter syndrome, because once I got in, I realized everybody feels that. Everybody is experiencing that on some level or another. And, I'd been in bands already at that point for 10 years. So, and I'd been in bands that would get, articles written about them in the local paper. And, so I'd been through a very minor version of that experience already. And in music, you're really a poser. You're really putting an image out there to sell what you're doing. So I'd kind of been through that on a very smaller level. So when it came to Wizard magazine, I was like, this is
right.
I've been training for that aspect of it for 10 years already.
I was in bands and stuff too, and it does help that you get used to whatever the media is, but also being up in front of people and having to communicate and talk. So but it's great because then when you do have to do interviews or you do meet people or whatever, you're more comfortable than people who haven't experienced those things and been put in those, kind of stage fright situations or whatever.
That's right. I'd gotten over my stage fright years before I was a comic book writer. I had this dumb theory that, when you hit the stage, you got to be ready to hit the stage.
Yeah.
There's certain situations where you can't learn on the job, and being sort of a public figure is kind of one of them. You know,
Yeah.
we've seen it all the time where somebody gets famous on some level, but they don't know how to handle it, and they have to learn sort of on the job. That's painful to watch.
Yeah.
You know, it's really painful to watch, and I didn't want to be one of those guys. So yeah, when I broke into comics, I was not cowed by any sort of public attention that comes with it. And let's face it, comic book writing is low level fame. It's about the lowest level of fame you can possibly get.
Right.
And that's what I mean. Although at the time it's interesting, when I broke in, Wizard magazine sold more than any comic book that was being published, including the X-Men.
Right.
So to get in Wizard magazine, I call that my Tiger Beat phase.
Yeah.
You know, where you're kind of the pinup boy for, you know, that month or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was interesting because that was a level of exposure that writing the X-Men wasn't going to get me. You know?
I think rock and roll is the same, not so much for bluegrass or classical, but when the band hits the stage, they've got to command your attention.
Yeah.
And I have a theory about writing. My goal is to grab the reader by the throat. And I think rock and roll bands have to do that. They have to start with a bang. And every time I think of that, I think of Cheap Trick's Hello There, which is an explosion to greet the crowd. And never fails.
Well, it's funny because I also had this. Right when I broke in, I'd been around people who had been doing it, other professionals, for a couple of years at that point. So I had been disabused of any notions. I mean, Mike, when I was a teenager, you were a rock star to me.
Right.
Because you were writing the books I was reading, you were doing what I wanted to do, and you seemed like a guy. I mean, you were a guy that had real life experience and presented yourself in a certain way. And so, you know, I was able to kind of fuse what I had been exposed to as a teenager, reading comics and reading things like Amazing Heroes, Comics Interview, Comics Journal, with all my kind of music and band experience.
Yeah.
So that I felt like I had something to hold on to when I finally broke in and had to promote my comics, talk about comics. I was kind of ready because of all that stuff that had been spinning around in my head. Thank you, Mike Baron.
Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome, Joe. I remember meeting you at San Diego Con briefly.
Yes.
Years ago.
That was probably my first San Diego. I mean, that's probably 95. And I went down there and I'd sold one thing. I'd sold one thing to Image Comics at that point. But I felt when I saw you there, I felt like there's a famous, Mike, you might know this, there's a famous clip where John Lennon is describing meeting Chuck Berry for the first time. And he almost blurted out, "Chuck Berry, my hero." You know, and when I saw you at San Diego, I was 24 years old. I wanted Mike Baron, my hero.
You're too kind.
I think I kept it together.
Yeah, you sat down, we talked. I'd like to hang out with you again at some point.
Yeah. Well, that was me faking it till I make it, Mike.
Right.
I just picture him like taking his sunglasses off and passing them on to you.
Joe, tell us about your approach to comic book writing. Do you outline? Do you draw?
I've done it. I've done it all really because the funny thing is, it's interesting. I'm a real process junkie. You know, like when I saw like your interviews back in the day, Mike, and they would show like your handwritten scripts, your hand drawn scripts. That was like, I was fascinated by that. You know, I thought, well, that's a way. I mean, even now, I am so amazed because you've sent me over the years. You've sent me some of your original stuff on the yellow legal pad paper.
Yeah,
and I just am in awe that you sent that in to things like DC Comics, Marvel Comics. I mean, doing Nexus and Badger with on your own, that's one thing. But to send those scripts into the machine of corporate comic books, I thought, this guy's amazing. This is the coolest thing I've ever seen. What balls?
Well, they loved it, and to a certain extent, they were prepared for it because Archie Goodwin, who was my editor on a number of titles, also wrote that way.
Yes.
So did Harvey Kurtzman.
Yes. Yeah. So I would I've done comics that way. I've done I do mostly for time management purpose. I do mostly full scripts just typed out. But I've done, depending on the gig, I've done obviously I've done Marvel style where it's the plot first. I've done full scripts that are as sparse as you can get or as sort of Alan Moore bloated as you can get. Because what would happen was I would see another script format and I would say, I want to write in that script format. I want to see what that's like. It's like trying on different clothes to see what style fits you best and what looks best on you. I have a basic format where I learned this from Steve Siegel, where he would outline everything on one page of paper, like 1 through 22. Each line is one page, and it would work out that what you could fit on one line of legal paper or whatever, or notebook paper, would roughly translate to one page of comics.
I've done that.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what I do now, because then I work from that outline and just transfer it over into the computer and just write it out that way. I do one thing that people have told me is very interesting. I will write a whole comic only visually through first, the panel descriptions first. Then I'll go back. I mean, occasionally I'll write in a bit of dialogue if I have something in mind or something occurs to me in that moment. But for the most part, I'll go back and then script my own dialogue, my own script, I guess you could say. Because it's already now laid out visually. All the panel descriptions are there, what happens in every panel. And then I go back and I dialogue it because I want that spontaneity. I don't want to kind of go through kind of page by page, panel by panel, doing everything all at once. I want what I'm always trying to get is there's this thing I've termed the sort of the flip through experience. You go to a comic book store, you see something on the rack, you pick it up, and you start flipping through it, and you get this buzz off the pages. You haven't read it yet. You just kind of get a sense of like, this looks exciting, this looks cool, I want to buy this. Well, I want that experience when I'm writing it. I don't want to just save that experience for somebody else. For me, I want to try to recreate that experience creatively as I'm doing it. So anything I can do to keep that buzz going during the process, because anybody who's written knows it can be tedious, just the mechanical aspect of it.
Right.
So I want to keep that spark and that buzz. It's kind of chasing the dragon a little bit, but you do what you got to do if you're in a career where you end up writing thousands and thousands of pages of stuff.
For me, it's all about knowing what happens next. Because if you know what happens next, it's not a problem. It's a pleasure to write. But when you don't know what happens next, that's when you start tearing out your hair.
Well, I think the most gratifying thing about doing it as a career and doing it for a long time is that whether you know it or not, you gain the skills to problem solve like that. Yeah. And if you run into a brick wall in a story, I'm fairly confident in my ability to work that stuff out, even if it means going away from it for a day or two.
Exactly.
Letting your mind,
that's right,
sort of absorb it or mull it over. I mean, some of the best ideas come in the shower or come when you're driving, when your mind is otherwise occupied. And your brain is allowed to, I guess, relax or somehow not be so wound up, so tight about it. And I feel like a real writer then will find those solutions every time. Sometimes it's a year after.
Right.
It will come if you give. That's why these days I'm kind of taking myself out of it. I have enough deadlines in TV and stuff that in comics I've taken myself out of the deadline game. Give myself a lot of lead time.
Right.
So those solutions, I give myself plenty of time for those solutions to come. And it's not necessarily just a deadline-based solution. It's a real story solution.
It's kind of fun to, you know, create something with music with a band, and it's kind of similar when you're working creatively with comics or TV or whatever.
It's very similar. I mean, when you're, you know, 20 years old, full of testosterone, and you're in with 4 other guys, you're like monkeys in the trees, you know, working it out.
Yeah.
It helps with the collaborative nature of comics. It's helped a lot with the Man of Action thing because that's 4 guys.
Yeah.
And we've been working together for 20 years. And every time those guys get wound up about something that's sort of interpersonal.
Right.
And they're going, you know, again, these are the kind of things I went through when I was a teenager, you know. And again, those were, in terms of the 1,000 hours, those were my 1,000 hours of horrendous interpersonal relationships with other guys in a creative sense. Because when you don't have the emotional tools, because you're just an immature punk, and you're trying to collaborate with other immature punks, you learn some things about human dynamics and how to deal with people, and just not necessarily. And my partners in Man of Action would certainly, you know, corroborate that I'm not necessarily the most even-keeled, even-tempered guy in the world, but I do have the 1,000-yard stare when it comes to knowing, okay, this is about not necessarily about creativity, it's about people. This is an interpersonal dynamic.
Right.
That's when I can step back and kind of get the wider perspective. Okay, that part I know how to kind of get through. Sometimes that just means stepping back and letting someone else, or, you know, in the case of comics, letting an artist kind of go where they need to go with it.
Right.
And just going along for the ride. And sometimes it's about really asserting yourself, saying, no, look, I have a vision. Let's go with this. And you know, you kind of have to muscle your way in, you know. So it's going both ways with collaborative issues in comics, where I've taken the lead and really directed an artist to go where I want him to go. Or I've sat back and let that artist take me someplace and enjoy that ride.
Yeah.
So I think when you have a long career, you have enough different projects that no one project is the be-all, end-all of your creative life. You have the room and the space to let things go on one project and hold on tightly to another project. It all evens out in the end because you just got so much stuff going.
And I did want you to talk a little bit about Man of Action. Just like for those who don't know what Man of Action is it's a collaborative between 4 different people.
It's 3 writers and 1 artist in terms of comic books, but Duncan, who's a fantastic comic book artist and just a great artist. He's a writer as well. He's written his own comics and stuff. So we look at it as 4 writers.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a natural progression from working in comics. You know, we all started, we all met each other working in the X-Men office. I was writing Cable. Steve Siegel was writing Uncanny X-Men. Joe Kelly was writing X-Men. And Duncan was drawing X-Factor.
Yeah.
So we all met in that environment. Then we all kind of migrated over to DC. We all worked on the Superman titles together. And the corporate line is that working for a corporation was tough. Working with each other, we found really fulfilling, and really we got a lot out of it.
Right.
So we just decided, I guess it looks kind of smart now, but we saw that the tide was turning and that comic book material and comic book culture was starting to take over Hollywood. It was starting to really become a thing.
Right.
So we figured, well, if we join forces and create, in a sense, a production company. That's kind of the original idea of it. A kind of a ready-made writer's room that we could take advantage of things as they were happening in the early aughts, you know.
Yeah.
And that proved to be the case. I mean, we got a lot of juice out of being this collective that had all this experience with these big franchises in comics, so that we were starting to be called upon to create and work on big franchises in, say, animation, you know, TV animation. So that transition, it just made sense based on our collective experience. And we figured there was strength in numbers, and so we kind of at first we sort of huddled together, just trying to, not get lost in the shuffle. And we found that being a group was a lot more. There was a lot more strength in being, a bunch of solo artists.
Everything that you guys do seems very balanced. So it just I think there's kind of wisdom there too, because you all have slightly different tastes in certain areas.
Yeah.
And so it helps. It's kind of like Pixar or something, where it's you get all these, talented people together, and then they turn out this, product or IP or whatever it is, story, and that will appeal to a wider range of people, because it's not just one writer's voice.
We all do comics. So when I'm doing comics, they're exactly what I want them to be. I have total creative control with my collaborators.
Right.
And when I do stuff for Image, it's soup to nuts. It's idea to execution, the graphic design of the comics, the look of them, page count, format, everything. So when you have that outlet and you're able to do that, when you go to do it, you turn around and you do something like a Ben 10 show at Cartoon Network, and you're working on that show, it's easy to kind of give in to the corporate flow, or even the intercompany flow within the action, because I'm not jonesing to have it be my way. I got plenty of things that are my way.
Right.
So we're all more inclined to kind of give ourselves over to a collective vision, because we see the value in that. I mean, Ben 10, I don't think any one of us could claim ownership on Ben 10 as oh, that was my thing, the other guys just helped out.
Right.
That's truly all four of us contributing, and all four of us collaborating and adding little bits and pieces here and there. And that's been very successful. So that just kind of proves the point when there are certain things when you don't hold on too tight, you're not white knuckling it, it's even more successful. It just got bigger and bigger and bigger. So that was a big lesson for me, not to be so megalomaniac on every single thing that I work on, because the things that I've sort of been happy to lay back on have been amazingly successful.
Right.
So I don't ignore that at all. In fact, it promotes a certain laziness, because you go, well, look, if I just kind of sit back and let this thing go, it might be another Ben 10. Which would just work just fine for me. So, I say, roll on, guys, roll on.
How did you voicing Shades in Generator Rex come about?
Well, I mean, Generator X, that was another thing that we created for Cartoon Network, and we really worked closely with everybody involved in the production. So it's one of those things where the animators, the artists, the storyboard artists decide, oh, for this episode, we needed a group of guys to interact with Generator X, and why not base them on the guys who created the show?
Right.
So they come up with these cartoons, and then it's just like a joke that keeps going.
Right.
So then we see them in the storyboards and go, oh, that's funny. And then somebody goes, well, why don't you do the voices? And we're, oh, that'd be funny. And then next thing you know, you're on the call sheet. You have to show up at the studio and do it.
Right.
And it was, an exercise in knowing the things you're not skilled at, particularly. We did one episode, and I think I think everybody agreed that's enough of those guys.
What all do you have going on right now? What all are you working on currently?
We did a lot of, we took advantage of the pandemic and did a lot of development. Wrote a lot of TV Bibles and animated series Bibles. And now we're going out and starting to pitch some of those shows. The Sonic animated series that's going to debut at the end of the year on Netflix, that we've been working on, those guys mainly been working on it for, 5 years now. I mean, animation is also a long lead time.
Right.
Especially when you're dealing with something that is, an existing IP. There's a lot of people that have to chime in on it. So that's taking a while. This predates the first movie. I mean, there's been two movies, feature films out.
Yeah.
And it's taken to kind of develop this show and get it going and get it up on its feet. Image has an anthology out right now that's celebrating their 30th anniversary. I've got a strip in that that's showing up in the next 3 issues, 4, 5, 6, and 7. I used to get a real buzz, and I know a lot of creators do, about announcing something like I'm going to be doing this,
right?
They Twitter or whatever. First of all, I'm not on any social media, so that curbs that impulse. But I don't really have that impulse anymore. It's you were asking me about process earlier. Yeah. I'll talk about Mike Baron's process for 3 hours. I'll talk about my process. I'll try to squeeze it into about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Because I'm so bored with my own thing.
Right.
But I love talking about comics. I love talking about writing comics, how other people do it. But I'm so bored with myself that I just can't imagine. Mike, when you asked me how do you write your comics, I was like, oh God. Got to talk about this now. It's so boring.
I have to watch myself that I don't go on and on about my process.
Oh, I could listen to your process for days, Mike. I mean, I find that stuff fascinating, and I that's why over the years I've pestered you to say, send me your old scripts, Mike. Send me whatever you got. I'll take it. I've got, just for people out there, here's what I have from Mike Baron. I have a Nexus script. I forget the issue number, somewhere in the 30s. You sent me not long ago. I have these are my prized possessions. I have the Flash number 2.
Oh.
I have Flash number 9. I know I have those. I might have one more in there somewhere. But the fact that and these are the original scripts. These are the original legal pad scripts.
Yeah.
The fact that I own those is such a source of joy for me. I can't tell you. I love those things so much. I bring them out every so often. I Xeroxed them right away when I got them so I wouldn't ruin the originals. So I have the originals kind of packed away, and I look at those things periodically just as inspiration. Like I can't believe I'm doing the job that Mike Baron did when I was 15 years old.
I gave them all away.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't have any left.
Oh God, I'm saddened, but I cherish the ones that I have.
I think he gave me 3, and all 3 of them were Clone Zone.
That's all I had left at the time, Chip.
Do you think I'm a big? I mean, I liked Clone Zone, but
I mean, I'm a big nut for those. I mean, they're sort of artifacts, but they're also living documents because I know what they turned into. So
right,
that's kind of like my secret. I mean, I'm more of a collector of that stuff than I am of actual comics. Obviously, I love comics, but I'm such a process nut. I met about 10 years ago at San Diego. I met Bob Fleming, or Robert Lorne Fleming, as he's known in the industry, who wrote a bunch of things in the 80s that I loved. He wrote Ambush Bug with Keith Giffen. Right. He wrote a series with Trevor Von Eeden called Thriller, which was a huge inspiration for me when I was a kid. Not only the comic itself, but how he got that comic going. He was a proofreader at DC for like 6 months. Then he pitched this thing, which was not a DC comic. It was his own creator-owned thing, and he got it approved. And it was kind of like a shooting star in the night. It only lasted. I mean, Bob only lasted about 7 or 8 issues, and then he left his own title. Trevor Von Eeden only lasted like 8 or 9 issues, and then it lasted another 3 or 4 after that, and then it was gone. Well, I met Bob at San Diego. I was like, Robert Fleming, this is amazing. And he subsequently sent me the Xeroxes of every document that he had that was involved in Thriller, from the initial pitch to the next iteration of the pitch to all the scripts he wrote. And I just thought it was the greatest thing that I'd ever seen, because I'd heard about these things from when I was a kid. He talked about them in like Amazing Heroes. I wrote this document, gave it to Jeanette Kahn. I got to be able to have and read that document was like, I know it's the geekiest thing ever, but it's some of my favorite things. Those things are, Keith Giffen used to lay out his comics.
Yeah.
on just typing paper. And I've got a bunch of those from like the early 90s when he did a bunch of stuff for Image. And I love those things. I love those things. The Alan Moore scripts that I have, I cherish those. They're a bitch to read, but they're fantastic. And so, that's to sort of do that for myself. I can't recreate that for myself. As much as I've tried, I cannot get the buzz that I get from like holding like that Flash #2 Mike Baron script in my hand. But I mean, you talk about chasing the dragon. I'll chase that dragon until I'm dead. I think it's why I keep doing it.
Thought about prose?
I've thought about it, but it's one of those things where I don't know if you feel this way, Mike. But I mean, when you connect to certain art forms, once you learn the language, the basics of the language, it's like it meets you halfway. You take a step towards it, it takes a step towards you.
That's true.
And I felt that way about movies and comics and music. But prose is one of those things where I've tried to meet it halfway. It's never met me halfway.
It took me 30 years to learn how to write a novel, but that's because I'm a slow learner.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to prose, I just never felt, I mean, I love prose and I've written some things for myself, but when I read things for pleasure that don't have pictures, I tend to read biographies or nonfiction stuff. So when I've written what I would consider prose, it's usually nonfiction things. Like I've been kind of working. I've not told anybody about this, but I've off and on been picking away at writing kind of an account of my musical career in my early 20s, when I was really into being in bands and really part of the that sort of underground rock scene that I was in at the time. And it's a thing where I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just kind of writing it down and trying to write it down in a way that fulfills what I'm trying to get out of it. And then I'll go back and look at it and I think, well, would it be entertaining or fulfilling for anybody else to read? Usually the answer is no to that question. So then I'll do a pass on what I've got with that in mind. How can I make this something that another reader who's not in my head will get something out of? So it's an interesting process, but so far I've only done it on something that is more biographical than just fiction. What's interesting is that when you're playing in a band and you're serious about it, which I was in my early 20s when that was my thing, you're really plugged into the culture in a certain way.
Right.
And depending on what era you're in, for me it was the early 90s, early and mid 90s. That is something, you can now 30 years later look back on that and really understand what your place in the culture was, or what your connection to pop culture was.
Right.
It's sort of the same thing with comics. I didn't know until I broke in and met other people that were doing what I was doing that were roughly my age. I didn't know anybody else was into Nexus or Thriller or Badger or Mage or American Flag or all those things that, to me, when I was isolated in Tennessee at 14 years old, me and like one other guy were into that stuff. I didn't know anybody who read comics, and there was no internet. There was no way to connect with other people that didn't live across the street from you if you were lucky, or lived in your neighborhood or went to your school that were into comics. So you'd grab onto those people and they were like friends for life. When you are part of a scene or part of an era of pop culture that you really connected to strongly, you don't know that 30 years from now, other people will start to be archaeologists for that era as well. So now I'm starting to see like 90s nostalgia happening, really, really majorly happening. Like there's this new documentary on Netflix that I watched over the weekend about Woodstock '99.
Train wreck.
Yeah. It's great, but I'm like, this is like the treatment of that. This is 1999, and we're getting documentaries that are in depth, really thoughtful, really thought provoking, and really place it in the context. But I remember 1999.
Sure.
I remember it well enough that I didn't give a shit about Woodstock 1999. You know,
No, pass me by.
And now, there's fully fledged documentaries that are, you know, going in depth on that material. It's
Well, you know what they say about a train wreck. You can't look away.
Yeah.
I'm a big documentary fan, and especially things like American Experience and things like that, where they go through like a president's career. You know, like they'll do like the Nixon documentary or the JFK documentary. I'll watch that stuff forever. But it's long enough now that they've got like the Clinton documentary.
Right.
And it's amazing to see the same treatment they give to, you know, FDR or Truman or Eisenhower or JFK, which is all history to me.
Right.
But they give that same gravitas to like Bill Clinton, you know? And it doesn't compute in a way. It's the same, but it's the same format. And it's giving all the, you know, all this, you know, the serious music and, you know, all the interviews talking about, well, with the Lewinsky scandal. I'm like, the Lewinsky scandal? For Christ's sake, you know, I was in my 20s when that happened. And I was looking at it as a 20-year-old guy, you know, and now there's, you know, major cinematic documentaries about it. It blows me away. But I guess when you get old enough, your own past becomes a history for other people. Part of me, it was trepidation about having, you know, talking to Mike in this format because I felt like I would gush too much.
Right.
In gushing, I would just make him feel very old. And Mike, I don't want you to feel old at all. Yeah, you're not old to me, man.
Thanks, Joe. You're as old as you feel.
Yeah. Well, there's some days where I hope that's not the case.
Well, I guess we can let you go and Mike can go to bed now. Just joking, Mike.
I'm gonna go take a nap after this.
Well, that's good for you. Things are going to switch around for you in a few years, Joe.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, but he'll still have sunglasses on, so no one will tell.
Hey, listen, I don't ever do on-camera interviews. I always turn my camera off. So this might be a first for me.
This is Hey,
we appreciate it.
Well, I wouldn't. I don't think I would do it for anybody else. You know.
Yeah.
Thanks, Joe.
And that's vodka you're drinking, right? Not water.
No, it's
for an hour.
It's lemon water. I have a ritual. I go out. You know, in California, you swing a dead cat and hit a lemon tree. So I get to pick lemons and
nice
and do my thing. I'm hoping it has some health benefit. That theory is not quite borne out, but you know how it is when you try something for superstitious reasons, you don't want to stop doing it. You know.
Yeah.
So it hasn't steered me wrong yet. I haven't had any ill effects, so I take that as a good sign.
Yeah, I wouldn't stop doing it now. I mean, your career will probably die.
Listen. I hate to admit I don't know, Mike, if you feel this way. A writer's career sometimes is based a lot on superstition and not wanting to kind of rock the boat in it one way or another because you feel like something may get dislodged or if anything, you know, fly out of your head. And to me, that's like that I'm most afraid of more than anything else. That I'll lose the ability to use my brain in the way that I've been using it for the last, 25 years.
Mike probably dealt with that when he was younger, but I think he's outgrown it now.
Yeah, I have. One of the things that keeps me going is that I think I'm a better writer.
I think you can't age a good idea out, you know? Yeah. So that's what keeps me kind of, I don't get depressed or I don't feel like, I feel I'm not the guy on I'm not the get off my lawn guy. And I hope I never become that guy because I still get excited about my own ideas. And I still feel like I have enough of an ear to the ground that if I'm excited by something, somebody else will be excited by it. I'm not so esoteric in my tastes that if I come up with an idea that even I feel like might be a little on the edgy side, it's never so uncommercial. And if it is, I know how to kind of push it through a commercial filter,
right?
Get something out of it in fact, the things that I used to be more esoteric, especially when I worked for Marvel and DC, because I thought, well, I'm the rooster in the house now. I got to subvert things. I got to kind of be the iconoclast guy, because there's plenty of guys just towing the mainstream line. That didn't do my career any favors. However, it did distinguish my work to some degree in some of the things I did. But now when I do things for Marvel and DC, I feel like I do things that for me are very commercial. Like I'm not going to go to DC now and pitch, the Spectre. As much as I love the Spectre, I understand the marketplace, and I understand that you don't pitch the Spectre now. That's just
right.
That's a fool's errand. You don't go to Marvel and pitch,
Punisher.
Yeah. No, Punisher. I think Punisher every so often has its bout of popularity.
Yeah.
But you don't pitch Speedball at Marvel now. I have a great Speedball story or a great.
I remember Speedball.
Yeah, you don't do it, or I wouldn't do it. So I don't think I'm kidding myself when it comes to how to occasionally plug into the mainstream, how to kind of get whatever juice you need out of it, and also serve a commercial purpose as well. When you delude yourself into thinking that, oh, Marvel just doesn't want my Speedball idea. Right. That's when you've lost it. That's when you're kind of off the track. And Mike, you can probably speak to this where, like I said, to me, Mike was a rock star because he would show up in interviews in like the Comics Journal and Amazing Heroes and Comics Interview. And that was my world. Yeah. And that was the industry's world. In a way, that was the trade part of the industry. So if you were being interviewed in those with those outlets, you were a star in that world. You were famous in that world. Yeah. And being that famous in that world means you could get projects approved. You had name recognition. For me, that was Wizard Magazine and the early days of the internet, where it was very centrally located with certain websites were the hub of the industry. Now it's all spread out. We're in a phase where, the same thing we're talking about with music. In comic books, there are no stars right now, really. There's a couple of writers and artists that still have some heat and can get things approved based on name alone. They're few and far between because there's no mechanism to promote this stuff. Yeah. It's not, there's probably the biggest writer in comics right now has an interview up somewhere that I wouldn't know where to find it. Yeah. I wouldn't know where to look. And when things are decentralized that way, you can look at it one of two ways. One, the shame of it all is that there's not a, in terms of, the music industry, there's not an MTV or a Rolling Stone magazine that kind of is the center of that universe, and things branch out from that. In comics, there's not a Wizard magazine right now or a Newsarama or whatever. The good thing about that is that you hope it becomes a meritocracy across the board. That things rise and fall on the merits of of what they provide from an entertainment point of view. The downside is getting the word out about it and getting that in people's hands and getting people aware of it is tougher. Yeah. So it's a half empty, half full, scenario, how you look at it. And I believe me, I go back and forth on it every day. I feel one way about it or another. I don't know how you feel about it, Mike, because I know you're still out there working on stuff.
I've never been busier in my life.
The problem is a lot of the news sites and stuff like that have become politicized, and they either lean left or right. There's no kind of hub that isn't that way right now. So it's kind of, I don't know. That's made it tough, especially for anybody just trying to talk to everybody.
Yeah, I stay out of that stuff. My politicized view of things is it's either good work or bad work. Those are the politics I live by. Is something entertaining or is it not? Right. Does it speak to me or does it not? Does it
I
give me
think
that?
that's the bottom line, Joe. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. And that's been with art throughout history and writing throughout history. It's like you can enjoy things that are written by people you totally disagree with if the talent and the creativity is there.
Well, the problem is in the last few years, everything's been politicized.
Yeah.
Because, again, I don't, not to sound too much of a Debbie Downer, when art becomes kind of, you're in a fallow period where there's not these major artistic events happening in the culture, you'll turn to things like politics to help gain some top spin on whatever it is you're doing.
Right.
And in doing that, you might gain some awareness, you might gain some sales. And the minute you gain one sale from politicizing something, everybody starts doing it. Everybody starts trying to commercialize it. This is not about politics. This is about money. Anytime something is politicized, it's about money.
Yep.
It's about, there's an audience out there that will, buy this because it appeals to their sense of, of what side of the aisle they're on.
Right.
That'll pass.
Thank you, Joe, for spending your time with us.
Mike's a busy guy. He's got to go.
Yeah. I understand. Well, thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it. It's been fun.
We'll talk soon.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Bye.